I'll just give it one more minute for everybody to find their way in. Please forgive the strange noises of roosting birds in the background. They're going crazy tonight. Right, I will kick off. We're joined tonight again by Gary Palmer, who is our second time on the show, which is fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us again, Gary. Gary's going to cover this evening some aspects of Pixinsight that we perhaps didn't cover with Dave's run through a few weeks back, which was, I guess, quite a quick kind of workflow run through. So Gary's going to kind of go back and fill in some of the bits and pieces, and also go through some of our next data release from the Icarus Observatory, which is a whole heap of crescent data. You guys all know who Gary is already, so he probably doesn't need much of an introduction, but I'll do a little bit anyway. So Gary is an author, he's a reviewer, he works with lots of equipment manufacturers on new equipment. He does an awful lot of courses, one-to-ones, through his Astro Courses website. So if you're looking for any extra tuition, he's a great person to spend some time with. And very much looking forward to your talk tonight, Gary. Thank you very much.
Cheers, thanks, Grant. Thanks for inviting me along, and hello to everybody. I sort of wanted to set out a couple of things with Pixinsight. And one of the main things is when you're reviewing and when you're testing a lot of this stuff, and with our UK weather, you don't get the amount of time that a lot of other people do to put these images together in Pixinsight. So a lot of the things that I've worked out are really, I wouldn't say shortcuts, but different ways of doing it, and quicker ways. I'd love to spend 15 hours, 20 hours on an image, but I just don't have that amount of time. And I very rarely have that amount of data, if I'm being dead honest, to turn around and say, this is what I would like to do. So what I'm going to do is share the screen up now, and then I'm going to bring up Pixinsight. Can you all see this okay?
Yep, that's showing.
Yeah, cool. Excellent. So I'm going to cover the batch processor and the new enhanced processor that they're forcing us to use at the moment in a little while. But this data has been run through the batch processing systems, and it's been calibrated with the darks, the flats, and the biases. It's nice, clean data, I have to say. The camera and the system out there and the skies are giving us some really clean data. So if we blow into this, we can see there's very little noise in the background of the images anyway. Now, as I said, other people do. Really, the thing to say with Pixinsight is for every process, there's probably 1,000 to 1,500 ways of adapting that process. And that's one of the problems. And it's probably what also scares us a little bit, because we're looking at all of these different videos and these different books on everything. And it gives us a bit of a negative. But the one thing that I can say with Pixinsight is that really it's designed from a beginning to end process. And what I have seen is a lot of people trying to get around the batch processor, whether they get problems with it or whether they get time constraints, because really this is the problem now, that the batch processor with the laser cameras is taking a long time to process all of this data up. So lots of people jump off into another piece of software. They might even go into Deep Sky Stacker, something like that. And then they'll stack the image in that, calibrate it in that, and bring it into Pixinsight. And one of the big problems with that is you actually remove a lot of the data that is in the images. Whether it's a one-shot color camera or whether it's a mono camera. And you're starting to see this quite a lot. And I have a lot of messages. I posted up a simple Andromeda the other day, and I had loads of messages of people saying, how are you keeping the detail? How are you keeping the color? And it is by really using Pixinsight's processors and its batch processing system. So with these are not stretched. They're in their raw format. And what I would do with these, what we're probably going to do is just run up to the point where we combine the images together. Now I do it slightly different to some people, and sometimes I will manually process these. I won't use the batch processor. I would run these through with manual calibration on flats and dark subtraction. So if we start with these, what we're going to do first off is dynamic background each one of these. I'm just going to close this up because it's slightly in my way there. See, right. So I'm just going to move a couple of bits around because I've got bits on the screen hiding where I am. Okay, so I DBE these, dynamic background each one. So we set these up. Sample generation, and normally run somewhere around 12, and the samples per row. Now I generally keep this quite low. You can run this up on my field, but your problem there is that if you're getting close to the actual object, you'll create a halo in the background. And it is one thing to be aware of, and that's quite evident on galaxies like Andromeda and things like that. So we're going to have a target correction of a subtraction, and we're going to generate these. Now, another thing to keep an eye on is the tolerance. Depending on what camera that's used, you might have to run this tolerance right up to 1500. And certainly if you've got any vignetting issues or field of view issues where the edges of the field of view might be quite pale and the flats have not fully subtracted. So we might have to run this up to 1500 to get right up in the corners. Once we've got a few alignment points around there, it's not really the amount. Yeah, it is the quality of these. And then what we can do is we can save the process over, close it down, and then apply it to each image. So we remove the subtraction, close it on each image, and then apply to the next image. Okay, so if we get any areas like this here, then we might have to run the DBE directly on that particular image. So it looks like it's clipping just a fraction out on this O3 image. This is quite straightforward. It's just run the DBE direct on that and just create a new model for that one image. And what I do is, as I've seen that in there, I'm going to add these in manually. There we go, that's better. Okay, so all the non-DBE images really you can close up and just save yourself some space on the desktop. Take one more hide in there, there we go. Otherwise we just end up with too many images and you start tripping over yourselves in these. So, next process really is to crop the images up, yeah, so that they're all aligned. You see the stack edges on one of these I saw just there, yeah. So you use the dynamic crop process. Just remember you can't have two dynamic processes open on the screen at the same time. So if the DBE is open, then there will be a problem. And what you can do to get all of these the same size, that was me messing that one up then, just managed to double click it. Just going to go back into that again or it won't work. There we go. Right. Okay, so if we outline it, take the stack lines off, and just drag the process icon over. And the same thing again, close it up, and then drop that on each image, and that will resize each image, hopefully exactly the same. If you do make a mistake with it, it's really better just to close the process and restart the process back up again. Otherwise, it will cause all sorts of problems. Once we've got to that point, I normally do some noise control on the images quite early when they're in the unstretched format. So my way of noise control is to use the multi-scale linear transform. And then we set this up quite simple. I will change these processes. You'll see I've already marked these up in here. So top one's at 3000 and the amount is 50%. I will change this depending on what you see goes on. And what we need to do is make a clone mask for each one and stretch the mask. So I need the keep getting the zoom thing come over the top here. So, okay, so histogram transformation. Just move that over for a second. And then render that open there. So select the clone and then drag and drop. If you haven't got that in the way, drag and drop that into the bottom bar on the histogram. Then if we flatten back the clone, we can just drop that on top. And that's it, it's a fully stretched mask for the HA. We're going to do this for each one. Then we invert it. And drop the multi-scale linear transform on top. That's it. So if we zoom into that, and then go backwards and forwards, you'll see the difference. Yeah, it's just flattening out any noise. This more is really something for the one-shot color cameras, the CMOS sensors. The CCDs get less affected by this than the CMOS sensors. But we would do that for each one and then remove the mask. Just gonna move that down a bit. There we go. And again, sometimes you can stare at screens too much. I've been staring at screens all day today, so I lose myself in the icons sometimes.
Right, okay, so that's a question. Is the idea with the mask that you're then protecting all the actual detail and you're only applying the noise to the background?
Protecting, yeah, that's the key thing with the mask, is to protect the detail on there. And you're removing the noise really from the background. You can play with the masks a little bit, but in general, I find it works quite well because there will be noise, a certain amount of noise carry over into the object. So if we're later going to sharpen that, then it allows us to sharpen the object and not actually sharpen up the noise that's there. most cameras will have some form of noise in the background there. Right, let me just check. Got to, yeah. Okay, so that's the noise control on the image. Now, everybody's different on that where they combine these. I generally combine these when they're stretched. Certainly if they're going to be in a Hubble palette or they're narrowband images, I generally run these up to the point and stretch them first. So to try and get these nearly all the same, and it does depend on the amount of data you've got for each filter, the best way of doing it is really with linear fit, yeah, after they're stretched. But to get these actually stretched straight up, we can do a little preview box. Hit the right keys. Oh, and then I'm going to put a little preview box in the background there. What you'll find is I was working on 2 screens about 20 minutes ago, so it just takes me a couple of seconds to work out where the screens move the icons around, yeah, as I'm looking on it. Okay, let's just move that out of the way. We can select the preview box. And just apply it with its settings. Exactly the same, we can do the same for this one. And so on. Now I have had to play around with these a couple of times on where you drop the preview box. This is one of the key things for this. Sometimes if it's a little bit too dark in the background, it can need the preview box moving over some of the lighter nebula. If a couple of these look a little bit bleached out, you can curve these up a little bit just before they're combined or linear fit, but I would do the linear fit on these first. What you need to do is register these 3 images or star align them. Pixinsight doesn't like and linear fit doesn't like working on images that are not registered together. So even though we might have stacked them all in the batch processor and they might all be perfectly well aligned, the linear fit will want to see these registered. So the easiest way around that is just to use one of these as a reference, yeah, but we're going to save these all back to a file. Once they're star aligned, then we'll reload them back up. And I'm pretty sure I've got these already in the folder that are star aligned. 2 seconds. Okay, yeah. So I'm just going to clean these out now, just to make some room. Okay, so this one here, which is brighter, all I did with it was just give it a little bit of a curves transformation on the image. Okay, and go into linear fit. O3 is generally the brighter one out of all of them. So I generally use that as a reference. I'm getting carried away with myself then. Okay, for processing or aligning the channels together, channel combination, and then we're going to go again. When I was playing with these earlier, this depends on what color you like, you know, because everybody is different on what colors they want their image to look like. If we do this in the standard SHO palette, we get quite a blue crescent. So it's whether you really like that, whether you like it golden color, whether you like it a red color, as to how you combine these three channels together. It's quite easy to change these colors around from here. You can play around with the masks. You can use SENR with it inverted. There's 101 different things that you can do. Just want to move this over here. Okay. And then move that to there. So we could straight away invert this. We could bring a luminance mask off and start working on the detail that's in there and change the colors around quite a bit. One thing that I did want to cover at this point, if we were going to take the stars off of the image, is that since Dave did his workshop, there's been a new platform update for Pixinsight. So the StarNet system works slightly different now. And if I just run into the StarNet, in the libraries folder for Pixinsight, you will need to grab your weights out of there. They're tucked away in the libraries folder. If you don't pick those out, then the StarNet's just going to keep coming back with an error, whereas before you just literally used to drag and drop the process icon onto there. But if we wanted to remove the stars out of this, I'd probably just create a luminance mask and do it off of a clone, and then take the stars out from this particular image. What I didn't do then was click on the star mask. It would have generated me a star mask at the same time. But it's not the end of the world. I was really going to run up to this sort of point with this data because I wanted to really cover in the batch processor at the beginning and settings for some of the color cameras, because these are all changing at the moment depending on what software you're using to actually capture these. How long that's going to take. There we go. So let's remove it out. We could, so I've just got to wait for this to move at the top. There we go. And now we've got this that we could start work on. So we can, again, start looking in here. We've got some areas where you can see that the stars have been removed. So probably flatten that back down straight away and use TGV denoise on it. Okay, so that's flattened that back. And then starting to bring out some more detail in it itself. So to make a clone mask, remove the star net, remove these, bring the histogram back up. And select the clone now. And we're just going to darken it a little bit. I just want to darken it back. Add it on as a mask to the other image. Remove it so that you can see what you're doing. And then we could run HDR multiscale. Still use the de-ringing, even though there's no stars in there. There might be areas that have not quite flattened back where we've removed the stars. So you'll have a circular structure in here in different areas. So go back, forwards, and start to see the structures coming out in there. And we could also just pull the mask off for a second. I'll go back in and use the dark structure enhance. See what that does to it. Drop it back a little bit, have a look at it. And then maybe an LHE, yeah, just to bring out some more dynamics in it. But you will need the mask back on for that. So I'm just going to lose that one as I decided to do that. Just quickly make another one. As we've darkened the structures a little bit, I'm going to go a little bit less on how much we tone the image back. The area that's always the problem in this is this area here. This is the one that you try not to overexpose, because there is detail there, but if you can pull some structure back in this area, it always overexposes on lots of different cameras and lots of different filters. So for a fast imaging, it's okay, but if I was really spending some time on this, I'd take a little bit of time with the different steps here. But basically, you've created a luminance there. And if we wanted to add that back to the image, we need to add the stars back into it. Otherwise, it's going to look pretty rough. So you just add that onto there. There we go. Remove the mask, and then go straight back into Pixel Maths. Hang on 2 seconds. I'm working. You're going to have to go. Bye. Right. Try again. There we go. So use the expression editor. No, I didn't make my stars come out in the clone. That was my mistake on that one. Sorry about that. But when I did the star net, I should have ticked the box there, and I would have had my stars in a separate image. Yeah, and I could have joined those back together. And then we could bring those in over this. Yeah, change the colours on this. So if we wanted to invert it, bring out some of the purple that's in it and use the SCNR. If you find that you take out too much, then just bring your percentage down a little fraction. Everybody's different again. Some people believe that green shouldn't be seen in deep sky objects. Other people think in the SHO palette, a slight amount of green in there looks quite nice. It balances the colours up. And it does depend on what detail you're getting. In S2 on the crescent, really there isn't a lot of detail there. There's only a tiny amount of structural detail there. And then we would add this back in over the top. We would combine it back in, and as you can see, when you bring it over the top, you're going to bring out a lot of the structural detail that's there. You could also use quite a lot of the other processes that were in the other Pixinsight tutorial the other week. And there was some really good stuff in there. What I really wanted to look at now, and I'm just going to collapse out of this and come back into something I was working on earlier. So we're just going to load another project up. Give it a couple of seconds. What I wanted to look at was really the batch processing and the image integration side. So just let these images load up. The image that I put up only probably about an hour and a half ago. This was from last night. It's literally 2 hours worth of data. Lots of high cloud running through, mist running through, different things like that. So there are going to be color issues. There are going to be slightly softer in different areas or other things with it. But it's still perfectly acceptable image to put out. And that's the key thing. And this is really what I wanted to look at, because again, it's another image that I'm already getting questions on tonight. How we're getting this. So I'm going to close some of these windows down. And look at the layout for the batch processor. Okay, this is how I set the batch processor up. One-shot color camera, pretty straightforward. Now we're using the weighted batch processor just because that's what Pixinsight's telling us. But I've also run these images through the batch processor and there was no real difference. None that I could really tell. So what you got to ask yourself is how long you want to sit on the computer, because this, even on a high-powered computer, will take it about an hour and a half from this particular camera to run through this process. More images in there, then the longer it's going to take. So we load the lights in, CFA the images, which means it's going to debayer them. And this area here is what's tripping everybody up. Yeah, is the band mosaic pattern and the up bottom fits. The reason it's tripping everybody up is because of your capture software. And what people are not realizing is that certain capture software, let's say SharpCap for instance, writes from the bottom up. So it writes the fits file from the bottom up. That means that If you captured in, say, ASI capture, that writes from the top down. It doesn't mean to say that they're wrong, but when we actually go to debug the image, then we get a totally different process. And we get all our colors mixed up, or we get star alignment errors. And that's the most common thing, is a ransack error as we're starting to get into the star alignment. And that could already be 40 minutes into the calibration process, and we start to find all the images are getting kicked out. It's basically because it's got the wrong debar pattern attached to the image. Now, just because the manufacturer says it's RGGB doesn't mean to say it's RGGB. It's down to that piece of software that you're actually capturing it. And I think this is where a lot of people in the early days with Pixinsight got tripped up, tried it 2 or 3 different times, and then just went, I'm going to do it in Deep Sky Stacker or Astra Pixel processor or something else. So you have to look at the way that the software is actually capturing. If it's capturing from the bottom up, then we would uncheck this, yeah, and then we would go for the opposite. So this would be GBRG, yeah, for instance. So you would work out what your opposite Bayer pattern is. If you use something like AstroArt, for instance, AstroArt won't give you those options. It just automatically read it. And you'll soon find out that after running through the process that you need to change the debar pattern to GBRG, yeah, for an RGGB, and so on with the different cameras. So whatever the camera is, you really need to play around. Now, unfortunately, in Pixinsight and its processing modules, the debar doesn't offer you the option to flip those around. So I have seen errors if you go in there and you just throw one image in just to check the debar pattern, that you can't see that properly. It's not giving you the correct information. The flats are all loaded up, same with the flats. Seen quite a few errors for those. It depends on your camera. Something like this, which is the new ASI 2400, I would probably do my flats with a mean value of around 22,000, something like that. And you're looking for the mean value. When you look at a histogram bar, you can actually use this bar here on the Pixinsight screen. You'll get these come up. The green one's going to go off the scale, yeah, because we're using a one-shot color camera. So it's going to show you the extra pixel, and it's going to multiply that. So it's probably going to give you a histogram reading of somewhere around 60. The luminance is what we're actually interested in. That's the one that we want the mean value on, not the green channel. Because when we calibrate the image up, what we don't want is to automatically start causing problems. And the flats will calibrate the color to some extent. And depending on what happens, you can get a color cast. So if we were doing live flats on the sky, let's say half an hour after sunset, something like that, the sky is actually pink. So we will get a red cast come off of these. So this is really why we're not interested in the colors. We're just interested in the luminance. As a rough guide, I normally say somewhere around 35 to 40 on the histogram. But a lot of the capture software has actually got pretty poor histograms on it. It's so bunched up, and to actually stretch it out and work it out where you are precisely is quite hard. So you might need to capture an image, take it across to something like Pixinsight and read the values on it so that you're getting them correct. But at the end of the day, there's no point in messing up your images with your flat frames to start with. Darks are pretty straightforward. They like the same temperature on these CMOS cameras, and they like the same timing, really, and the same gain settings. I have found a gain weighted batch processor can throw up more errors for different things, say temperatures and things like that. It can cause all sorts of problems. It needs to be very precise in here. And I think in the UK with our skies, nothing actually works precise. You know, we're getting varying weather all the time. So the main images themselves are really not the best data that you can get. Now, I've always ran bias through. I know that everybody else has mixed opinions on them. I know a lot of other images that run bias through with these. And certainly if I was doing this as a manual subtraction, I would run a super bias through with it. I find it helps the images, and I've not really had any problems doing it. Once this runs, about 2 hours later, give or take a fraction, we just come out of that, then we would have our image integration that we would need to run through. And I'm not going to run through loads of them, but I'm just going to run through the setup for this. So if we just go back to there, collect them from the registered folder. We're just going to take half a dozen of these. If it takes too long, I'll come out of it, but it's just really to set up the process. So this is the area where we remove lots of things, satellites, aeroplanes, noise. There is a multitude of things. It can every now and then make mistakes, but in general, if you keep your flat frames pretty well sorted, then you don't get any problems with it. So rejection 1, again, you can either use the Winsorized Sigma clip-in or the Sigma clip-in. If you found that it's gone a bit harsh, then maybe try the Sigma clip-in. There has been times with images and set things going on in the background that it can get issues. But we run these through with the Winsorized Sigma clip-in. And then it's in this area here. So I generally run the high, in this area here. Yeah, I generally run the high up, right up to about 9,000, somewhere around there. And I would run the low up to around 5152, something like that. Now, if I think it's going to take a long time, then I'll come out of it. I have got a fast computer, but these are full frame images, so it did take quite a bit of time. It's not been too bad on that. So with StarNet, with all of those things, using this process, I've actually managed to remove 50 satellites out of one image stack doing this process. So it works quite well, leaves the images nice and clean. If you've got some elongated areas around the stars, it can clip off the edges of those if your guiding's out slightly or you've got other issues there. Or maybe even if you had to gain a little bit high on the camera, it will clip some of that out as well. Okay, so we've got our rejections there. We just stretch these up, we can see. And because it wasn't a lot of images, there won't have been much to actually reject out. So you can see there. Now this is really, I was using the camera on a Vixen, which is only really for APC size sensors. So it was well outside the field of view in these areas. It was just really as a test to see what was going on. So straight up, I didn't even mess around with it. Dynamic background extraction is going to have an extremely hard task to try and get rid of the vignetting around the edge. So there's no point in even playing around there. I could get it into a full frame image, but it would take a lot of work and I'd probably end up using Photoshop for a good chunk of that. So we can remove that. We can see what it's actually done. Let's just open up some of these so I know where I am. There we go. Okay. I'm just checking nothing's hiding under there. Cool. So using those same processes before, I'm just checking what I've got open. That was the one I was looking for. Cool. I've gone through really what we covered in the other part with the Crescent Nebula, right up. Used the mask stretch to stretch it out, and I've used StarNet, yeah, to remove the stars, created a luminance version of that, and then I've worked on that and brought that in together. One of the things to look at are also the color settings, because there are a couple of different ways of doing the color settings with this. Now we've got our standard color calibration, yeah, where we'd use the 2 preview boxes, really one over the galaxy and one over the background, and we'd run a color calibration. The photometric color calibration I've been using quite a bit, and I do generally find it gives us quite a reasonable result at the end of the day. I've been quite happy with it. So for using that, we need to set in our focal length of the telescope, set in our pixel size, and search the coordinates. So just type in the object. For instance, on this M31, search, yeah, and then put that in by getting it, and acquire the data from the image as well, the time and the imaging from the header file. And then you just literally adjustments to the image. When you're testing new cameras, you're never quite 100% sure whether it's correct. I will say that. That is one of the problems with, so I'm just getting some notices that the internet's dropping down. That is one of the issues with it. So it's a case of really what you choose to do. For adding using this and working on the detail, one thing I did do was clone out these larger halos in the background here. So we just took these out of the image. We had the star mask created. That was by removing the stars out of here. There we go. Got one more in somewhere. Cool. So this I did some work on. I've gradually go back through the processes there. Histogram transformation, using the same thing with the mask on again. And once we're ready, maybe with an LHE or something like that, it's just quite straightforward with a pixel maths to add your stars back in and get your mask back. And then you can use that as a luminance over the top of your color. That's normally the best way, what I've found on this. Yeah, but everybody, as I say, they're so different. There's so many different parameters for each box on here that it does get quite daunting. And even I look at an image and I'm halfway through it and scrap it and go back to the beginning and try something different. But you're never 100% sure what you want to do. Once I've got the image in here, it generally does end up back in Photoshop. And what I noticed in here, if I go back through the history, yeah, when the image was opened, we had quite a cast. Some off of that vignetting, but also where I've lowered the mount slightly, I'm getting some off-axis light coming. Yeah, so I was noticing that I was getting a cast on that. And I generally find that Photoshop's the easiest way to remove it. So I use the RC Astro plugin, use the lasso around it, invert it up, yeah, and then gradient exterminator to take that out. Yeah, and you notice that that's gone. Once it's deselected, yeah, it's then working on some a little bit of saturation here and there. and just really tidying the image up, flattening the two images back together again. And selective color, that's just really changing the black on the background slightly with the exposure, just to lighten it a little fraction. And again, this is something that I keep seeing quite a lot, and probably a lot of you notice it. If you have a monitor too bright, your image will be too dark when it's posted online, and vice versa. So you need to really look at what you're processing your images on. I use a screen calibrator, but if it's bright in the room, that screen calibration is out the window. It's not worth anything. So unless I rerun the screen calibrator again. So I normally say with a laptop, if you're processing on that, you certainly want your screen down somewhere about 40%. Anything higher than that, and there's loads of data that's actually in your images that I can't see, and lots of other people can't see. The background just comes up too dark. Using a bit of a blur on it and a dust and a scratch. Again, that's these last two Andromeda images that I've done have been a little bit noisy just due to the sort of mist and the high cloud. So you're going to use something like that, and then just a multi-scale sharpen on it just to bring out a little bit of detail. And that was it. I left it at that. I could go further. You know, it's really down to each individual's taste on this as to what they want to do. But you could certainly pick out a few more colours. But what I have noticed is that the fog and sort of high cloud is knocking back the little bits of hydrogen and alpha here that you would normally see in this. So it's not the best data in the world anyway to start with. Has anyone got any questions on anything so far?
Martin's asked, can the batch process use flat darks?
It can do, but you don't really need to. So this is about how long you're taking your flats for. So if you're taking your flats really for say 2 or 3 seconds, then you might start to need flat darks. But I would generally run in it and calibrate those manually using the manual processes. If I was running down that route, I think the new Winsorized batch processor has got the option on there to do that. But I would generally go into a calibration, image calibration, and I would run these up manually. Yeah, so I would be starting to combine the darks, yeah, subtract the biases off of the darks and off of the flats. Yeah, and then working through calibrating each set. It is a little bit of a longer process, but it probably gives you a slightly nicer image at the end of it than the batch processes. And I know a lot of people who've been using Pixinsight since the beginning are probably still using this rather than the batch processor. Batch processor, if I remember rightly, has only been in quite recently. The earlier versions, you would do this manually in anyway. So, but everybody wants it down to speed, and you know, this is a little bit of using some of the other software. When you say to somebody it takes 2 hours to batch process your images, they're like, well, you know, is it worth it in the amount of time that I got out imaging? And I would say yes, it is. You know, from looking at the images that come off of some of the other software, it's certainly worth that.
Cool. Just on the way to batch pre-process, you then went in and integrated it yourself rather than using the batch. Is that just to give you that extra control?
Yeah, because the batch, well, in the early days, when you used the first install Pixinsight, it used to tell you not to use the image that it's processed. Because it was only really giving you an outline of what your data has there. And I've also found that if I turn off the, let's just run that up so it's there. If I turn the switch off on that, it actually saves me about 20 minutes of processing time because I'm going to do it anyway. Yeah. So I just uncheck the image integration apply at the bottom, and it stops me then getting that image, but I'm not going to use it anyway. Once you, and I had to do this earlier, once you get these in, I did a rerun of an Andromeda from last year, just looking at some data. And there was 200 gigabyte of data that come out of Pixinsight into that folder. You end up going through this and clearing out all of the calibrated stuff, lots of the master files and everything, just to save disk space, because you're ending up with so many multiplications of it, your image all the time. So it's really each their own, but I know one of the new books out, the RBA book, with people getting started, he says to go off and use that image. So again, it's down to each person. But if it's calibrated it or integrated it, sorry, and you've not got your parameters set in there correctly, you've got no real control over the image. That's really the way that I would look at it. So I would prefer to have control over the image as I'm going through, certainly in the early stages, and try not to automate it too much.
Talking of space and stuff, Tomato Bro is asking, could you outline the spec of the PC you uses? And I was going to ask about your storage. What, you know, the amount of data you must end up storing. What do you use for storage?
This is just part of it. I mean, any one of these disks on here, if I just go into the computer, where are we? All of these drives, I mean, these, every single one of them has got stuff on, and I had to transfer. One of them was getting filled up earlier, but something like that one there is just full of folders that stuff has not been done on yet. Yeah, so it's data that we've collected. I've had a quick look at it. Some of it might be rubbish, and I've just got to go through it and chuck it out, but I haven't got around to it yet. You know, so there'll be images in. We just take one of these over, for instance. So they're not even processed yet. They're just sitting there where we've captured it, we've tested the equipment, had a look at it and gone, just need to get that to open with Pixinsight, because I installed the ASI app the other day and it changed everything. So yeah, if we open it on there, for instance, so you're seeing now the difference there. There's lots of data in there that we can use and we can go ahead, but I just haven't had time to sit there and process them all. You're doing solar imaging, you're doing deep sky imaging, and you'll suddenly get a load of bad weather, but you actually be working on the equipment for some reason or something else and not really getting around to processing stuff. But this is really making sure that, you know, you get in the data from the camera, and you also, your imaging equipment is producing a reasonable image. So quite often it's the raws, you're just looking at it and they get left in a folder and eventually chucked away and probably never even processed. The computer specs, this particular one's an Alienware Area 51, so it's quite a large size computer, a couple of graphic cards in there and 32 gig of RAM, i7 processor. I've looked at the i9s, but I don't really want to part with that much money at the moment. But I generally use some form of gaming laptop for processing. And I've generally found this. I've seen a few questions recently on should I have an SSD drive or not. I think it depends on what you're capturing and what you're doing. If you're solely into deep sky, there's no point in an SSD drive for capture, because you only get one image every 60 seconds or 3 minutes or 10 minutes come into the system. If you're using the computer for capturing planets and solar, then you're going to have a lot more data coming in on the USB 3, and it's going to be fast, so it's going to need to be written fast, or it will slow the capture process down. So you'll start off nice. Let's say an ASI 174, 8 milliseconds, and 50% on the gain. That would probably bringing about 134 frames a second. If you drive slow, you'll suddenly watch it start buffering up and the frame rate will go down, and all of a sudden you're right the way down to, you know, somewhere around 50, 60 frames per second. But it traps the camera as well in the capture software. And that's your problem then, is that you're still waiting for the buffer download, and you might be wanting to image something else that's happening live in front of you. So on that side, I would say, yes, you need an SSD. And maybe on this side of actually processing off of these full frame cameras now, I do wonder whether we're actually going backwards. If you think about it, you know, 7 or 8 years ago, it used to take us ages to process images, just basically because our computers were slow. Now we've got really fast computers, and their cameras are giving us ever larger files. So we've really gone in a full circle, but for different reasons. So the computers do make a lot of it. I've got an MSI laptop that works really fast at processing. So if I'm doing something out and away from the house, I would use that. But really, i3 processors, they're okay for capturing, but for processing, that's where you're going to trip up a little bit. You need to go up a little bit, and also make sure you've got RAM. But I do think some of the specs on this, these different computers, or people saying you need this and you need that, you don't really. RAM is one of the main things you need in there, so it needs to be a minimum of 16 gig to make it acceptable when you're processing.
I found with Pixinsight, you also need a decent amount of space on your main C drive, because the temporary files it writes can get huge. And
they're phenomenal.
Yeah, and that
a lot of computers as well using like a NAND stick. So let's just use the like an Alienware or an MSI laptop, for instance. They give you like a 120 gig NAND stick in there, yeah, for your hard drive, and then they give you a standard hard drive. Yeah, it's your main like 2 terabyte one, and you're finding that once you've got your operating system on that small SSD drive, really, once you put anything else on there, some of your software, you're going to run out of space really rapidly. And I did earlier when I was processing at Andromeda, I ran straight out of space. I walked away, left it to process, came back, and it was sitting there with the error on the screen. And when I looked, I'd not cleared the folders out for a while. So you do need to be quite harsh on some of this stuff, because it takes up so much space now.
I was just going to say, we've lost a couple of people because it's apparently some people are getting some clear skies, which is pretty amazing. So if anyone else has got any questions, you want to fire them up. Otherwise, I think we'll let Gary go and potentially enjoy some clear skies as well. And I'm sure some of you other people out there are itching to go and do some stuff. I think we just lost somebody else then as well. Thank you very much, Gary, for joining us. I can't see any more questions. It's good feedback coming through. I think the trick we're going to have for these sort of Pixinsight sessions is such a big product. You know, we could spend a whole night talking about masks. We could spend a whole night talking about noise reduction, and it may well be that what we need is to start collecting up some sort of what issues people have, or what people would like us to cover, and then we try and put some talks together, you know, for some more specific areas.
It might be an idea to do a Q&A on this, you know, and actually run through, and not just Pixinsight, you know, maybe a couple of other bits of software that people are using, but they're getting problems with, and it would cover quite a few different little bits there.
I also wondered about getting people to submit troublesome issues they have in images, and then we put it up and look for some solutions in software or process, you know, in different processing solutions to those issues. You know, like light pollution would be a classic one, but things like star bloat and, you know, halos or whatever, you know, there's probably a variety of specific issues we could cover and look at different ways to tackle those. And what would be cool is to get some problematic images from members that we could then use live. So I think that'll be something we look at in the future.
Yeah, I think a lot of what I've seen in this really is the you know, the first steps with the batch processor or the script processing, and probably color calibration. Color calibration is the one that sort of trips someone up somewhere along the lines, and it starts to go wrong from that point. And it's quite hard to get it back. I've done it myself. I've, you know, hit the wrong area of a picture, calibrated it up, and I'm going through it and I'm thinking, no, I don't like that. Yeah, and I'll step back again. And there are 3 or 4 different ways of color calibrating. I mean, you could use the stars and use an aggregated preview and do it like that. So you're just using the whites of the stars. So there's different ways, but it's finding what really each person gets a problem with. But I don't have I don't generally follow the same process on every image, and that's really the same with solar. A lot of people say, oh, well, you've released, you know, some scripts or some different other bits for solar. I look at each image on its merits and what was going on that night. So, you know, at the moment for me, I don't know what the rest of you are like. I'm getting this sort of mist sitting here in the mountains for most of the day, and the sky is not blue, it's like a white at the moment. So it's not clear, and you know that's going to affect anything that you're doing, whether it's solar, deep sky, or whatever.
Thank you very much, Gary. Just before everyone disappears, next week we've got Dave Eagle's back to do a winter sky guide for us, which should be useful, because the last one we had was a few months ago from him. And then we've got some others lined up in the coming weeks. But as always, if anyone's got any suggestions for speakers or requests for topics we could cover, please post it up. And I will be posting up the Crescent data in the next day for people to have a play around with. Happy Cat Kate saying the same thing, having issues with clear sky but a thin film like cloth. Yeah, it's not great. I mean, the scene's been awful. You were trying to do some planetary stuff the other day, weren't you, Gary? And it was just all over the place.
Yeah, it was, I think my words to you were, I don't know why anybody bothers doing planetary in the UK. I just lost. It was, you know, you set up, you know it's going to be clear, and really even looking through the eyepiece was really bad. And it's been like that. I've been looking at it on the solar today again. You know, there's a couple of prominences there, but they're not even worth trying to capture. And you'll go through that. Where I am, I get affected really badly by easterly winds. The easterly winds put that white air into the mountains. When you're looking at them, they're not nice and green. They've just got a white tinge. So you know your seeing is going to be pretty bad. And the nights generally drop off about 1 o'clock, 1:30 here at the moment, just through that mist multiplying up. So it's a shame, because we've had July and August which were pretty poor, and now we're starting to get some clear nights come through, and the skies are still not as nice as they could be.
We're still optimistic though. I'm seeing some good Marses coming through, you know, across different bits of the country. Yeah. So I think the opportunities are still there. So we're just
yeah, I mean, it will be different for each person and where they are. But yeah, I think sometimes you just, same as everybody, you get a little bit frustrated. Certainly when you sort of set everything up and, you know, the usual, just as you start focusing, the cloud comes through or something like that. So that's part of imaging in the UK. It's what makes it challenging. So
keeps it fun. Keeps it fun.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Gary, for joining us again. I'm sure we'll have you back again in the future. And good night to everybody. Hope you'll get some clear skies, and see you next week. Cheerio, everybody.
Take care.